Breaking free from fossil fuels is messy. It's political and demands bold leadership.
It's difficult to overstate it.
From governments, the private sector, and us.
We gotta fight for it! No!
And while some nations can afford to move fast, they're dragging their feet. Coming up, the global south countries showing the world how a renewable revolution is actually done.
We have a mature technology nowadays that can make it.
And for those still fighting for support, here's a thought. Maybe stop calling them beggars when they didn't even cause this mess in the first place.
We're vulnerable, but we're not helpless.
This is just 2 degrees. And if that makes you uncomfortable, good. Is Donald Trump a threat to your net zero plans? That was a very kind, pleasant, politically correct response. For years, the Global South has been told to adapt, to build resilience and go green. But when disasters strike and payments are due, the world looks away. So here's the real question. Who's actually paying for climate justice? And what happens if it never comes? From rising seas in Bangladesh to droughts stretching across the Horn of Africa, nations in the Global South are facing climate chaos with hardly any resources to fight back. In 2023, Cyclone Freddy stuck around for weeks over East Africa, killing hundreds of people in Mozambique and Malawi and forcing hundreds of thousands from their homes.
You see, this area here was occupied by houses. The whole area here from up there, and people are gone. People are gone, things are gone, everything is gone.
In Pakistan, floods didn't just destroy homes, they erased entire towns. In Kenya, farms have dried up. And across the Pacific Islands, the sea doesn't just lap at the door, it drowns houses.
We are now in the danger zone for our planet, where we need to move beyond lots of rhetoric, broad fancy statements and broad commitments that never get monitored or enforced.
The science couldn't be clearer. Global heating is making storms stronger,
It's extensive.
droughts longer, and disasters deadlier.
They are all gone.
And while the Global South suffers most, it's contributed the least. And when it comes to switching to clean energy, the playing field is far from level. These countries want to move on from using fossil fuels, but they're stuck with weak infrastructure, expensive loans, foreign-owned tech, and crushing debt.
These countries will be completely crippled, and they won't do much for the growth and development of their country. All that they will be doing is collect revenue and pay service the debt. That time, the development will be stifled.
So no, this transition isn't just about technology, it's about justice. And that brings us back to the question no one in power seems eager to answer. Who pays for the damage already done? After years of delay and debate, world leaders finally agreed to create a loss and damage fund, but progress still slow, too slow.
We will continue to work with the parties to make the final adjustments to those issues that are still outstanding.
The energy transition must be financed. Adaptation must be financed. Loss and damage must be financed.
This is called climate colonialism, a crisis created by the richest and endured by the poorest. And the Global South isn't begging, they're only demanding for what's fair. Real climate finance, access to green tech, and an equal seat at the table, not crumbs from it.
We are going to let the world and the government know that us Indigenous people of the world, we're still here and we're not going nowhere.
And through it all, they keep going. In India, solar microgrids are lighting up remote villages. Farmers in Malawi are planting seeds that survive the heat. Indigenous communities in Colombia are guarding the forests that store our planet's carbon. Many are doing their part.
Sim, todos os governantes precisam tomar consciência, pois se não houver uma união, né, não terá vida para nossos filhos e nossos netos.
But here's the truth. The Global South has never had the luxury of time, and now that time is almost gone. Climate justice isn't some act of charity, it's the bare minimum owed. Ignore it, and the century will end with famine, floods, displacement, and death, not just for them, but for all of us. So attaining energy security is one of the Global South's greatest challenges, but how exactly do we get there? Well, one organization, REN21, led by Rana Adib, is trying to change the game.
REN21 is the Renewable Energy Policy Network for the 21st century.
It's launched the so-called Renewable Energy Champions Initiative. It's trying to bring energy leaders from the Global South who've amassed real experience in making renewables work, and then connect those people with current global leaders who are looking for that kind of support. So meet two of these champions. James Fletcher is a former minister from St Lucia. He helped push through bold energy reforms and modern regulations on the island. And Ramon Mendez Galain of Uruguay, he helped steer his country to achieve 98% renewable electricity, all the while cutting costs and creating 50,000 or so jobs. So this Champions Initiative feels like a quiet revolution to me. Global South leaders stepping in, saying, we've done it, and let us help you do it too. Why do you think this kind of peer-to-peer model would work where traditional aid or tech partnerships have not?
I think, reflecting back on my own experience as a minister, when I became a minister, there really was no model for me to follow. Now, granted, it was 2011, it was a long time ago, that's 14 years ago. The Caribbean, most of the countries in the Caribbean were just embarking on this renewable energy journey. But I did not have a wealth of experience around me, not in the Caribbean, and certainly not available to me within the Global South. And I think that is one of the things that this Champions Initiative brings. It brings ministers who have done this before in different jurisdictions. So Ramon and I are not both from the Caribbean, and Ramon's experiences in Uruguay are different to my experiences in the Caribbean. But many of the things he did are relevant to us in the Caribbean because he may have done it on a bigger scale, but he's done things that we can learn from, and vice versa with some of the things that we had to navigate. And when we do expand this initiative to Asia and to Africa, we have a much wider pool to take from. So you really are bringing the entire Global South in policy support at the highest level to ministers to help them navigate some very challenging situations, and to do it in such a way that they don't repeat the mistakes that we made. They don't face some of the delays that we faced, and that they can do it in a manner that's even better and more appropriate for the time. So I think that's really the strength of this Renewable Energy Champions Initiative.
When we talk about renewable success stories, Uruguay certainly stands out. A little over 10 years ago, this South American country leaned heavily on imported fossil fuels. Today, nearly all of the juice in the national grid comes from clean power. So Uruguay threw the entire green toolbox at its energy problem, from wind to solar, biomass and hydropower. It now clocks in at about 98% renewable electricity in a normal year. And here's the plot twist. They did it without handing out fat government subsidies. Instead, lawmakers rewrote the rulebook, opened the door to private investment, and made sure contracts were rock solid so banks would lend. And the payoff has been lower power prices, energy independence, and a case study every other country now points to when they say, wait, this can be done, and yes, it can make money. Minister Fletcher, you said this isn't a moment of trial and error. What were the lessons you had to learn that you now want to help others avoid?
Navigating a very complex investor ecosystem. The Caribbean, what is unique about the Caribbean is that the renewable energy argument is a very sound one and a very compelling one from an economic point of view. You know, where most of our islands, except Trinidad and Tobago, are paying upwards of 30, 35 cents, almost 40 cents per kilowatt hour for electricity. It makes perfect sense why we should transition away from using fossil fuels to using renewable energy, because that would immediately cause a reduction in price, but even more importantly, a stability. However, what makes the Caribbean situation complex is the fact that we are small markets. So yes, from a economic point of view, it makes sense, but from a economies of scale point of view, it doesn't, because there are not very many investors who would be excited by a 5 megawatt solar PV, utility scale solar PV system in one of the small islands in the Caribbean. You know, how do we aggregate demand? How do we cause the islands to work together, have a common understanding of what the problem is, so that we can attract the big investors? So those, I think, are the two most important minefields, if you want to put it, to navigate the complexity of the investor environment and ensuring that you have the right fit between technology and your needs in the country, and you don't have somebody coming and building out something that's not appropriate, and also dealing with your incumbent utility, understanding that that utility has been a player, has helped you along the way, so you should not have an adversarial relationship with it. But by the same token, if the utility company is not playing ball and does not see the importance of transitioning away from fossil fuels, then how do you navigate what can be a very difficult relationship if it's not dealt with properly? So I think those are the two areas that, for me, are the most critical.
Secretary Mendez, Uruguay has been held up as a model. It's achieved 98% renewable electricity. You pull this off without massive handouts or constant crisis pleas. How did Uruguay build trust both in the country and with international partners to actually get this done?
Well, this is a very crucial point. I mean, in fact, and this is what is happening not only in Latin America and the Caribbean, not only Global South, but many places all over the world, which is that we have a dominant narrative, which is saying that, in fact, we cannot avoid from fossil fuels because they bring confidence to the models, and because at the end of the day, perhaps it's the cheapest option. So one of the things that we did in Uruguay, and we're trying to share with other countries, is that we really need to think out of the box. I mean, we need a new narrative in order to highlight all the benefits that transition can put in place. First of all, once again, we are becoming independent of fluctuation of energy commodity prices. We are having a much more sovereign mix. This is valid for all countries all over the world. But we have a mature technology nowadays that can make it. I mean, for example, in Uruguay, once again, we have 98% renewables, but just with a complementarity of different renewable sources. We have the best combination that we can have in town. We have no batteries, for example, because just with the complementarity between sources, we can make the deal. So one of our goals is to try to share that there is a dominant narrative, which is perhaps not as good as it should be. I mean, it's not that precise. There are a lot of misunderstanding in this dominant narrative, and there's a new reality, which is not just technical discussions or academic discussions or political discussion, but there are facts. And facts are that today a renewable system can work with almost 100% renewables in the mix.
Now, there's this tired narrative that global South countries are just looking for a handout when it comes to renewable power or climate finance, and that they're a burden. But the truth could not be more different. Many of these countries are ready to lead the energy transition. They've got the sun, the wind, the ambition. What they don't have is fair access to finance. Loans for them come with much higher interest rates. Climate funding moves way too slowly, and promises of big summits, as we know, are often broken. So no, this is not about handouts, but about leveling the playing field. Because if the global South gets the tools, they'll do the work. And they've already proven it. Minister Fletcher, you talked a lot about the need for political will. But how do you build that when people still see small island states as fragile or waiting for foreign help?
I think first of all, the islands have to see themselves differently. I think sometimes we see ourselves as helpless. We're not helpless. We're vulnerable, but we're not helpless. And, you know, this energy transition is probably the only thing that can radically transform for the better the economies of the countries of the Caribbean. Our economies are based on tourism primarily, but also financial services, manufacturing, and to a lesser extent, a diminishing extent, unfortunately, agriculture. All of these sectors require energy as an input, some to more extent, a greater extent than others. So tourism certainly has a big input of energy. That hotel plant has to be air conditioned. It has to be illuminated. Unfortunately, in a way, because of the way we design our hotels, we live in a country where we live in countries where there's sunlight for 10, 12 hours of the day, but we have hotel rooms that are lit for 24 hours of the day, which doesn't really make sense. And I think that's another conversation that we need to have with the tourism industry. And sometimes we have rooms that are overly air conditioned, and you'd think that you're probably in a temperate country. You have a big demand for energy for manufacturing. You have a big demand for energy for the agricultural sector. So understanding that going all in with the energy transition can make all of your economic sectors more competitive and can also create new jobs, as Ramon showed very significant and very dramatically in Uruguay with the number of new jobs he created. So it's a win-win-win for the Caribbean. But I don't think that all of our leaders have appreciated that. And maybe it's because they are so preoccupied putting out fires and dealing with so many other things, because, you know, as small islands, our challenges multiply. And also, unfortunately, we're very vulnerable to climate impacts. So our countries are always in a state of repair and recovery. No sooner have you recovered from one natural disaster, and that natural disaster doesn't have to be a hurricane. It could be a drought, it could be flooding, it could be heavy winds. And you've had to borrow money to do that, and you have to do this cycle all over again.
Speaking about the way the global South is viewed, Secretary Mendez, Latin America is often painted as unstable, chaotic, corrupt even. But here you are, one of the cleanest energy grids in the world. How do you challenge these negative stereotypes without appearing, I guess, defensive?
Well, one of the most important points is that we succeeded and made a long-term commitment backed by the entire Uruguayan political system. We, based on a narrative that highlights the benefits of the transition at the national level, we succeeded to have an agreement that was backed by all parties represented in parliament. And this was crucial because, as we were all convinced that this was the best for us, for our constituencies, so this is simple to have a continuation of the process. And in fact, yes, Uruguay is a relatively smooth country. It's a stable economy. It's a stable political and a social framework. And this helped, of course, because if you're going to attract investment, then we have to, and they have to make them understand that it's. I mean, you can trust on that country. So having a long-term policy backed by the entire political system with clear goals and a clear mandate, and creating the appropriate condition for investment to come. Well, this was the panacea. In fact, we got about $6 billion investment for a very small economy like Uruguayan. So it is about 12% of the GDP of the country that we got in only 4 or 5 years, because the transition took place very, very rapidly. And this was mainly due to the fact that we understood what transition means, and we create the appropriate conditions for in order to attract investment. And this is exactly what we are expecting to do in the whole region. There are tools in order to do that, not only the fact of creating political agreements based on a common narrative highlighting the benefits, but also how to create the transformative ecosystem, what kind of rules, of regulations, of laws should be changed, what happened with the market design, which is the best market design in order to attract investment for renewables. So this is everything that, all the things that we are going to share with our colleagues in the region. And perhaps one of the most interesting points is that, in fact, we are not just by ourselves. We are not just sharing our own experience, but our organization, which is hosting this initiative, is REN21. And REN21 is a huge network of organizations. There are 120 member organizations of REN21. So we are coming with all of this. We are coming with the possibility of this organization helping countries in order to deliver for the transition. So in a way, we are just a door opener, nothing more than that. But then we are coming with governments, with industries, with knowledge, with research organizations, with NGOs, with a bunch of ecosystem which ready to help countries to make it to the condition to take place.
This episode is all about how the Global South is responding to the climate crisis. But in all honesty, we can't talk about that without looking at the other side of the coin, the Global North. Because the truth is, decisions made there heavily impact what happens in poorer countries.
The windmills are driving the whales crazy, obviously. It's amazing the way a true environmentalist would say, oh, we love wind. It sounds good, but that's about where it ends. So we're going to try and have a policy where no windmills are being built.
Yeah, that was Trump. Take the US, for example. When they pulled out of the Paris Agreement again, they didn't just walk away from the negotiating table, they stepped away from billions in promised climate finance. That money was meant to help vulnerable nations build resilience and survive what's coming. Instead, they were left with rising sea levels and empty accounts. And the US didn't stop there. The Trump administration also slashed its support for the Green Climate Fund and abandoned the Loss and Damage Fund. Two initiatives designed to support countries hit hardest by recurring climate disasters. My final question to you both: is Donald Trump a threat to your net zero plans?
The situation is different now. The Paris Agreement is mature. We're celebrating 10 years of the adoption of the Paris Agreement this year. There is quite a significant amount of action. Certainly not enough, because we are, unfortunately, right now, not on track for 1.5 degrees Celsius by the end of this century. We're probably more on track for 2.6 degrees Celsius, which would be catastrophic for small island developing states and low-lying countries. But countries are currently in the process of submitting new nationally determined contributions, NDCs, which hopefully will make them more aligned with a 1.5 degrees Celsius pathway. Now, the United States is a major emitter, so the United States not being part of that at the federal level is a challenge. However, there is significant sub-state action within the United States. You have many of the states, like California and others, that are proceeding with their net zero plans, proceeding with their decarbonization, quite separate and apart from what the federal government is doing. Now, if the federal government and if the president, by way of executive order, now tries to make it more difficult for them to do that, then we may have a problem. So it will cause Mr. Trump, in being in the White House, and his very pro-fossil fuel agenda will not help, but it will certainly not derail the net zero efforts of the Global South, and it certainly will not stop that march to transition away from fossil fuels to renewable energy.
A basic cooking stove is the heart of the home in much of the Global South. It's how families boil water, make food, and warm their space. Over 2 billion people still cook using solid fuels like wood and even dried animal waste. It's cheap and available, but incredibly damaging. The smoke contains black carbon and fine particles that fill homes with toxins. Indoor air pollution from open fires and traditional stoves kills millions every year. Women, children, and the elderly are most exposed, especially in rural areas. Some global north companies buy carbon credits by funding clean cook stove projects in the south, but many of these projects lack follow-up. They don't last or even reach the ones who need it most. This isn't about firewood, but power. Who gets clean energy and who doesn't? And it's about justice. Whose lungs matter and whose doesn't. Because no one should have to choose between cooking dinner and breathing clean air. That's our show. So the global north isn't waiting to be saved. It's building, innovating, adapting, but demanding a seat at the table. But climate justice only works if the whole world shows up. But right now, too many of them are looking the other way. See you next time.